always will try to like kind of measure love. That's always a thing that people do, even in the most typical monogamous relationships. And it's considered romantic to be like, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, right? And so like, let's not pretend that we don't do this, that we don't measure how much we love one person compared to another person. We do it, people do this all the time. Hi y'all, it is Kelly from the future, and when I say from the future, what I mean is this conversation that you are about to watch, this is our Bachelor recap of Clayton's season finale, part 1. So we filmed this conversation before we saw part 2 and saw how everything ultimately ended. We thought about not releasing this conversation at all, given the fact that, our feelings and perspectives about Clayton's journey have definitely changed given the way that he ultimately broke up with these women and the way he spoke to them when he broke up with them. But all of that being said, we still think that this scene in particular, this rose ceremony from hell as it's been called, there were so many really thought-provoking conversations and themes that came up during this scene about, what it means to love multiple people and, is it possible to measure love? How do you measure love? And, I think it's so important for us to talk about those themes because I think it's really easy to get caught up on focusing on how the story ultimately ended and our frustrations with that. But I think we shouldn't let those frustrations kind of cloud our ability to really see this scene clearly, because I think there were a lot of misunderstandings related to this scene and a lot of really charged reactions that we should talk about. So with all of that in mind, let's get into this analysis, and just please remember that we filmed this before we knew what happened in the end. And if you do want to see our reactions to what did end up happening at the end of the season, I'll link that video above or below. But yeah, let's just get into this. Hi y'all, we're Kelly and Julie, and we're here to find love. For this episode, I think we're going to focus in on really dissecting that rose ceremony from hell. There's just so much to say.
I'm screaming right now.
Shouting, crying in my brain, screaming at the television. I was on the floor. There was so much going on. We picked out a couple of the kind of key quotes from the night that we want to kind of double click into and kind of analyze. The line that I wanted to start with was one that Clayton said. So at the beginning of the episode, we opened with this rose ceremony from hell. Clayton comes in, tells the women he's in love with 3 of them and he slept with 2 of them. And he gives them the option basically to stay or to leave, and says what I think is like a pretty candid thing, which is, I do love you both and I want to pursue things with both of you. And if I knew which one I wanted to move forward with, I wouldn't string the other one along. And I think that quote is so key. If I knew, I wouldn't string the other one along. I think this is exactly how to view kind of this entire fantasy suite situation. I think there is a continued kind of narrative that I've seen as Bachelor Nation has been discussing this whole Clayton Susie thing, is this idea that he already knew it was Susie, but he just wanted to sleep with the other 2 for kicks. Like that kind of whole narrative, like he knew he wanted to propose to Susie, but he still decided to have sex. Like I think that is just such a lie on its face. And I think this quote really, it shows Clayton's heart, right? We see that Clayton was really not intending to, just drag Rachel and Gabby along for the ride when, he knew it was Susie all along. I think he's been honestly trying to figure out if he can get there with Rachel and Gabby, and that's why he has been pursuing his relationships with them. And so I think, he has a self-awareness to know that he should send them home if he knows it's not them. But so far, I think he just honestly hasn't known. Even if he had the strongest feelings for Susie, it seems like he just was not yet sure that he was going to propose to her. And I don't know why that is. I feel like this is something that has been so hard for people to understand. This idea that he could really earnestly be trying to see if there's potential with each of these 3 women. It makes sense to me that he needed to see this through. And I think this line to me solidified that, like, yeah, he really is. He's thinking about this. He understands that he needs to send them home as soon as he knows that he doesn't want to be with them. But so far, he hasn't known that.
I have slightly different thoughts about that take, because when he said that, I have some ideas about his confusion, or the heart behind his confusion. This is a problem I have with the show itself, was that he kind of ping-ponged very quickly from the Susie breakup to having to go to the rose ceremony and now dealing with all of their emotions. And Clayton is like are we really going to use him as a paradigm for relationship excellence? This former football player? Like, is he really going to be the one that's going to teach us communication and teach us how to navigate the choppy waters of relationships? Like, this is not the man for that. So I think there was a really missed opportunity for him to process everything and be really introspective. And because he wasn't, he was so reactive and so confusing. I think that if he was still struggling with the Susie thing, they really should have taken a break and not have had the rose ceremony at all. So it was just really tricky to see that, because I think if anyone was in a situation where their feelings were so heightened and they didn't know what they were going to do, it would be your reactions and your movements and how you're justifying your reasoning would also be so confusing, because you're processing in real time. Like, there's nothing conclusive about how you are feeling about things. So I can't take what he's totally saying about Gabby, Susie, and Rachel at face value, because he's still processing it in real time. And you could see that he's kind of bringing them along for the ride as he's intellectualizing everything.
You know, I think that's so true, that, like, he clearly was still processing. And at the same time, I feel like he told them that. When he begged Gabby to stay, he wasn't like, please stay, I know it's you. He was like, I literally don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I don't know if it's going to be us in the end. I'm not promising you anything. I'm not saying I'm going to pick you. He was like very clear. He was like, I don't know what's at the end of this. I just know that I do want to take the next step with you. And that is candid. That's honest. He's being very truthful. Like, he's kind of telling her, I'm still processing. I'm still confused. I just know that this is where I am with you, and I still want to take the next step with you. And I think that that is the most that you can really do in that situation. There wasn't like a way for him to like take space from the show and like pause the whole thing. He kind of had to keep moving with it, but like he was at least able to keep moving with it without like trying to be decisive, trying to act like he knew what he wanted. He was very clear. He's like, I have no clue what I want. I'm still confused. I'm still reeling from last night. I have no idea what's happening. I just know that I still love you both. And, you know, this is where I'm at. You can leave if you want to leave. And also, like, I still know that I want to pursue the next thing. That's the kind of honesty that and transparency that I think relationships tend to lack. I think people like want to hear hard answers. They want to hear only like the definitive final answer. Like, you thought through it and now you've given me how you really feel about this. And I just think that there is something so much that can be gained by taking people along with you in your thought process, especially someone that you're trying to build a relationship with, right? He's trying to build a relationship with Gabby. He's trying to build a relationship with Rachel, and, you know, not leaving them. I mean, this is part of my problem with how Susie approached the whole fantasy suite thing. She kind of made a decision. She was thinking through this for days without telling Clayton. And that's why Clayton was so blindsided, because he didn't know that she was trying to make a decision about whether or not she wanted to be with him based on the secret deal breaker. He didn't even know that she was thinking about that. And I just wish she had taken him along on her thought process. And that would have at least helped him not be so shocked in the end when she decided to leave. And I appreciated that here, he's not like waiting until the end when he knows. He's just like, listen, I just need to take you along for my thought process. This is where I am. You don't have to stay. If you want to leave, if you don't want to be here for my thinking, you can leave. But this is where I am. I don't have a final answer. And that's the truth. I think a lot of times in life, like, we spend a lot of time in the thoughts before we ever, like, it takes a long time to get to the final answer of any deeply hard emotional thing. So I think, like, that's just the honest truth of it. And so to be able to be with the people you love while you're thinking through this, I just think that's the right idea.
Yeah, you're right. That's a really great point that Susie blindsided him. So then Clayton took the other extreme of, I'm going to be completely open about the inner workings of my mind to offset that pain that he had experienced in the previous dynamic. I totally see why Clayton was so extreme in that reaction. I mean, I'm not going to fault him for being honest. I thought the whole conversation he had, it was so hyped on TV in all of the trailers, but it was actually like a very honest conversation that I don't think the leads typically ever really have. And I do think it's because he sees them all equally. I just think that it maybe would have been better if, like, the rose ceremony was canceled, he was able to talk to them individually, then together, and then the girls could talk. Like, there needs to be all of these conversations in play, because you just saw all of these moments happening last night that were so heightened. Like Gabby coming home, and then Rachel being like, if I'm the last one standing, I feel like the default. Like, I was only here because I chose to stay, and what does that say about me? They are just whipped up into this frenzy of confusion and uncertainty, like Clayton is. So I don't know, the whole situation is really hard. I think that he did handle it as honestly as he could, but there is something about being a lead on a show that he doesn't have. He doesn't have the experience, and it really showed last night. It really showed that he doesn't know what it's like to make it to the end of a Bachelor season, and what it's like when your feelings get invested, and how you need to interact with people, knowing that you do have to choose one if you follow the typical show format.
Yeah.
So to me, I just kept seeing that, like, wow, he is so inexperienced, and he is receiving no help.
So let's move on to the next quote. Gabby says, why wouldn't you just save it? She's talking about the I love you, the fact that he said I love you to 3 people, and she says, why wouldn't you just save it? And he responded to her, because I feel it. That moment to me, I thought was really powerful, because when she said, why wouldn't you save it? I saw the internet was like, yes, Gabby's asking all the right questions. But honestly, when she said that, I said the exact same words that Clayton said to her. I was like, because he feels it. Like, just because he doesn't say it out loud doesn't make it not true. So it's like, to me, it just feels so moot whether or not he says it out loud. The truth is that he felt it. The truth is that it was there. Whether or not he said the words, I love you, to any of these women, at the end of the day, the final girl will still have to deal with the fact that he was in love with 3 women, right? Like, that will always be true. And, like, I don't know if the idea is that he was supposed to hide that from his wife for the rest of their lives. Like, no. And that's the thing. It's like, people are kind of faulting him for being, like, too honest, but I just don't think there's such a thing. The truth is always a gift. The truth is always a gift. And that's the thing. Even when it hurts, even when the truth is painful, it's better to know exactly how Clayton is feeling, how your partner is feeling, rather than to have them give you kind of like a sugar-coated version of the truth just so you can maintain some kind of like fantasy about what your relationship is, because you want to be in the real relationship, not in your fantasy version of the relationship. And you don't want Clayton to be in the real version of the relationship while you're up in a fantasy that he's left you in. You want to be in there with him. So I just don't think this idea that he should have kept it to himself, like, it just doesn't actually work in real life, because what that means is that he's experiencing something by himself without his partner even knowing. And that will inevitably affect them both. And it'll, it drives a wedge to feel like you can't tell your partner the truth of how you're feeling. And so to me, this felt like it's just a moot point, this idea that he shouldn't have said the words, I love you. And it's like, again, like a little bit of a hate the game, not the player. Like, to me, it's like they're on a show where Clayton is supposed to develop really strong connections with several women. Like, that's the whole point of the show. And so to then be mad at him for developing strong connections with several of the women, to me, it's like, be mad at the process of The Bachelor. Don't be mad at Clayton for having a big enough heart to be able to fall in love with 3 people. That's not like a Clayton problem. That's a problem with the show.
I feel the same way. I'm a really big fan of open honesty. I think that when you hide the truth, it can be problematic down the line. It hurts so much more to tell someone truly, nakedly, vulnerably what you're really feeling, but it's always more honest that way when you can really reveal that to someone. And I do think that does show the depth of his relationship with Gabby and Rachel, for him to be like, yeah, this is not a very good side of me that I'm showing. It's not attractive to see me being so confused. This goes against the Bachelor lead being this like omnipresent force that just knows everything and is really controlling and manipulating and hiding and not revealing certain things because I want to just have the one. That's not his plan. That's not his game. So I do love his approach. I think with Gabby, one of my problems with what she said was she said that she wasn't in the business of competing for love. That was so hypocritical to me. She is on The Bachelor. She signed up to be a group of 30 women to compete for one man. She understands the format of the show. So then for him to be like, this is the format of the show and I'm actually saying it out loud, I'm not just like pretending to lean on the superficial fairy tale that the show is orchestrating for us. This is what's really happening. It's hard for me to choose between, all of these women, and then for her to be like, I don't want to compete. That didn't make any sense to me, and that felt like it wasn't about the relationship itself. It's like what you said. It's about the format of the show that they really needed to question and talk about.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. I'm glad that you brought that line up because, like you said, this has been what the show has always been about. I mean, they literally make contestants physically fight each other for alone time with Clayton on this show. They make these girls, like, do gimmicks to stand out, to earn love. It's always been a show about that. And so, like, that is not fair to pin this on Clayton, to your point. And then at the same time, I do think one thing that Gabby said, which was, I think, in the same kind of scene, she said, I don't want to be loved the most. I just want to be accepted and loved for who I am, right? And it did remind me, I think that was like a really key moment because this whole time she was really seeming upset with Clayton. She really didn't like that, he was basically saying that he's going to pick which girl he loves the most. She really didn't like that he was saying that. But when she brought this up, saying that she doesn't want to be loved the most, she just wants to be accepted and loved for who she is, this reminded me that Gabby's whole backstory is that she has felt like she needed to like earn love. I think from like her mom and from her relationships, and that's something that she has been working on. So it did remind me, and I feel like that was the moment where I did finally understand where Gabby was coming from, this feeling of like not wanting to feel like she needs to perform to earn someone's love. And I think that's a really valid feeling. I think the only issue there was just that him picking which girl he wants to be with is not about picking which girl is the best, right? Who's the best wife or who's the best like woman out of Gabby and Rachel. That's not what it is. It's just about figuring out which one do I have the strongest connection with and like who is the best for me. And so, Gabby is worthy whether or not he picks her, and that's never in question. And I think that she was kind of confusing this idea of like he's going to pick who he loves the most with this. She was confusing that with this idea that like, oh, it's like Rachel versus Gabby, who's the best between the two of them. And it's not about that. And that made me realize that Gabby is not upset with Clayton in particular. This is kind of Gabby's own shit kind of coming up, feeling like I want to feel good enough and I don't want to have to prove myself to someone else. And that's kind of like a story that Gabby has from her own past, this idea that she has to prove herself and prove that she's worthy of love. And that, whether or not she was worthy of love, is not in question in this situation, but she's bringing that to the forefront. She's bringing that up because of her own history. Gabby is seeing the situation as something that it's not, as something where she's going to have to like perform to like earn Clayton's love. And that's not what it is. It's just about Clayton deciding who he has the strongest connection with.
Okay, that's a really good point that you brought it back to her family history, because I forgot that she told Clayton that, and that explains why she kept, like, she was questioning him about that so perceptively, and why she was like, this is the wrong answer, because it was the wrong answer for her and her specific trauma towards, like, abandonment and feeling loved. But I do think that she did make a good point bringing that to Clayton's attention, because when he said, it's the person I see at the end of this, the person I love the most, she was like, how can you... It's not measured, right? But how can you determine that? And he said that he didn't know. To me, the first thought, and this is not the right thought, this is not the healthiest thought, but for people in that situation, it would be, okay, this makes things more challenging because the show is already based on a hierarchy. There's 1, 2, 3, 4. When you're in the rose ceremony, it's like who's getting picked first, who's getting picked second. You're kind of thinking about how you are being organized in his mind, right? So then for him to say, I see all of you almost equally, like, not like you guys are totally different, but my love for you is kind of indistinguishable enough that I need to continue pursuing it. My question would be, how can I be the girl he wants the most? Who I am is not enough as it currently stands, because I am not sticking out to him in a big way. It's not like he's asking for time. It's not like he's saying, I need to see what it's like when we're in conflict with each other. He said that he just needed to continue seeing things pan out. So then that does bring in this performative aspect of, I need to do something else to show that I can be the partner that he wants, that makes me different and unique from the other competitors. And it all of a sudden, this game show quality does come into play, because now you are comparing yourself to them even more than you already were at that exact point. So this was, I don't know, this was a really interesting thing, because I think the show is starting to kind of like dip its toe into showcasing poly ideals, but they're exploiting it from a monogamous perspective. So it's really hard to see that, like, how beautiful polyamory can be. It's just being stomped on by what the show wants, and Clayton is kind of being seen as this doofus, and like Gabby and Rachel weren't totally aware that they were in the situation where things were so level like that, because they're also new to the show. So all of this just feels like they're stumbling in the dark a little bit, just looking for some answer, some light at the end of the tunnel to move towards, and they have no idea. That's kind of scary.
Totally. I mean, what he said, this idea that, like, you know, he just needs more time to, like, figure it out. It can invite this feeling of, like, I need to, like, what do I have to do to stand out and to be the one that he picks? And, like, you know, unfortunately, that is kind of the framing of the show. It's, again, not really Clayton's fault himself. But I will also say that, you know, in any relationship, you know, the reason people don't just meet and get married is because they want to, like, spend time together getting to know each other, whether that's, like, 6 months, a year, 3 years, 5 years, right? People spend that much time together, not because they're like, oh, well, I'm not sure if I really love her. It's not that. It's just like, you know, let's, like, go through some repetitions. Let's, like, experience life together. Let's experience more together and see how we feel. See if our feelings stand the test of time. See if, you know, anything changes when we experience different things. And so for Clayton to say that, to say, like, let's go meet my family. Let's go, you know, go through the other steps of this process and see where it takes us, see what new information we get. I think that's valid because it's not like, let me see if you, like, can do this, like, pretty pony jump. It's like, girl, I've known you for 5 weeks or whatever it is, you know, 7 weeks, you know? Like, he's only known her for so many weeks. I think it's okay for him to want to continue to get to know them and to, like, take as much time as he can to continue to get to know them. So I think that this idea that Gabby is having, that it's like, oh, like, he's, like, trying to decide whether I'm, like, deserving of love and I have to do stuff to, like, win his love. I think that's just a Gabby thing. I don't know. I just think that's, like, in Gabby's head, as opposed to, you know, if in the end, you know, he spends another 3 weeks with her and then he decides that he is more in love with Rachel. I think that that is not a slight on Gabby. That actually doesn't say anything about Gabby and Gabby's worth and how great a partner Gabby is. It just means that he had a stronger connection with Rachel. And, you know, that's the thing. It's like, in the show, honestly, every breakup on, especially at the latter part of any season of The Bachelor, every breakup, it's like the person who just got sent home goes, oh, like, what is it? Is it something I said? What happened? Like, why I'm so blindsided? And the lead always just says, like, it has nothing to do with you. Like, you're so worthy, and, like, what we had was so real. I just had stronger connections with other people. That's always what they say, and I think that's just, like, the truth, right? That's the whole point of the process, is that, of the Bachelor process, is that you're gonna figure out who you have the strongest connection with by going through 10 weeks with all of them and seeing, you know, at the end, who am I feeling the most connected to? And so this idea that there is something particularly, this brings us to another quote, right? This quote was, whoever I pick is who I love the most. A lot of people had such a huge problem with Clayton thinking about the situation in that way. And I almost don't understand why, because that has always been the premise of the show, right? The premise of the show has always been, I'm going to pick the person at the end. I'm going to develop really strong relationships with several women and pick the person at the end who I have the strongest relationship with. And every breakup on this show has, like, at the end of towards the end of every season, the breakups are always like, there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with you. I just had stronger connections with someone else. And I feel like that is a core truth that, like, Gabby is forgetting, that it has nothing to do with her if he decides that he likes someone, that he is more connected to someone else and there is more relationship with someone else. It's not about who's the better woman. It's just about, like, where is the connection the strongest. And so with this line in particular, this whoever I pick is who I love the most, I just don't think that there's anything wrong with him thinking about the situation in that way, other than the fact that it interrupts like that monogamy fantasy of like the one and like you're the only one for me. I would never like it interrupts that fantasy, this fantasy that there is just one person who you're supposed to be in love with. But I just, other than that, there's nothing wrong with Clayton seeing the situation that way, and that's just the honest truth of what the process is. And it, you know, it's just kind of how love works also, frankly. Like, we're always just picking like the person that we like the most to continue being with, right? Like, so
I think what makes this so interesting this season and Clayton as a lead is that he is kind of letting people see the man behind the curtain a little bit. There's this magic in a script that Gabby and Rachel and Susie, to a point, they're following. They're like, okay, this is what it means to be the person that will be at the end of this, and to deviate from this programming that they've been taught is confusing because it's allowing them and exposing them to elements of the show that is typically shielded from them until after everything is over, like the pomp and circumstance. So I think it's very interesting that Clayton is reckoning with the show by being extremely transparent about his process, and it's deconstructing how the show currently stands and how it doesn't work for modern relationships today. It doesn't work for contemporary dating, especially for a lead like Clayton. You know, his heart is giving him all of these conflicting emotions and information, and then Susie happened, so he's like, I'm gonna now be open of these two other girls and just completely tell them what you shouldn't tell them, which is that I'm confused and I love them all. But that is very jarring for the girls who want a focused, special, individual experience that is kind of independent from the other experiences. Like, they know it's happening, but they don't want it. There's something quantifiable.
So they don't want to know. They want to like close their eyes and pretend.
Exactly. And they kind of want it to be like, if I'm chosen, that means I'm the best, and best in that kind of like, it's not a good way to look at it, but that's how they're seeing it. And Clayton is like, no, it's not because you're the best, it's who's the right connection for me. And that little bit of distinction that's so abstract, and it's really emotional, and it's not something the show has ever presented before. You have never seen this conversation happening publicly. It's confusing for them to wrap their mind around because they're literally creating the template for it as they go along. So that is very interesting that the show opened up this pathway for us to explore.
Well, you know, it's funny, like you're saying, like the show opened. I don't even think the show opened it. I think Clayton opened it by choosing to be honest. And I think that, you know, people are like blaming him, but like, I mean, in some ways, I mean, this has always been what's been happening, right? Like, in every season, they're always choosing the person that they love the most, whether they say it out loud or not. And to your point, Julie, it's kind of just like people want to pretend that that's not what's happening, but it's always what's happening. I mean, even outside of the show, like, people are like, this is not how you choose, you know, this is not how relationships work, where you're just, like, picking the one that you love the most. Like, they're not like candy bars. And I'm like, I mean, you can diminish this all you want, but like, I mean, it's so common in like think about like in wedding vows, it's so common for a person to be like, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, or I love you more than anything I've ever loved in my life. Like, people always say that stuff. People always will try to like kind of measure love. That's always a thing that people do, even in the most typical monogamous relationships. And it's considered romantic to be like, I love you more than I've ever loved anyone, right? And so like, let's not pretend that we don't do this, that we don't measure how much we love one person compared to another person. We do it. People do this all the time. And the only difference now is that it's out in the open. It's challenging the you're the one narrative. Like, those are the only things that make this different. Like, it's only different because, you know, Clayton has chosen to be transparent about it. And so it's radical for this show. It's radical for this process to like have someone who is being so open about this instead of going through the scripts. But I don't even think that this is itself radical. Clayton is doing the same thing that everyone does. I mean, the fact that even Gabby, when Gabby said, love isn't measured, you can't measure it, like, I don't know. people always do that in their relationships. They always compare how much they love one person to how much they love another person. I was thinking about that Sex and the City quote from Samantha, when Samantha broke up with that cute younger boy, that they were such a cute couple, but she ended up breaking up with him because they were like... Smith, yes. And so she broke up with him. She was like, I love you so much, but like, I love me more. There's still a quantification. She's still indicating like there is some amount that I love you and there's some amount that I love me, and the amount that I love me is more. I don't know if we can math out how much love there is, but she could feel it. And I think that's what Clayton is just trying to do. He's just trying to understand, where is my heart really? Like, where do I really want to go? And I think that it is okay for him to have been pursuing it the way that he is. And I think people want to believe that this is not how love works, because people want to believe that there is just the one, but it's just not true. Like, I'm sorry. It's like, I think it's painful to be in this situation, but it's just, the truth is, like, people are always capable of great love for lots of people. People are capable of it. And so, yeah.
I totally agree with what you said. This is what the reality is like. It's multi-optional dating now. And to make it seem like there's limitations to that is not realistic. I don't even know if he knew that he was challenging those concepts when he was being honest, but that's essentially what he did. Like, I know all of the stuff I need to do for the show. I should hold back. I don't have to be so in the moment. I don't have to do X, Y, Z, but then that would be doing me a disservice, because you think about other leads. Yeah, like, who have just kind of like held back. Then Katie Thurston is a really good example of this. Like, she didn't choose John. She chose Blake. And that was even a little bit confusing because of the whole Greg Gripple leaving, and now she's with John. And it's like, if she had really been in the process more, and if she was really being honest of all of her contestants about like her feelings, she would have chosen a totally different person. So I think Clayton is like, this is the environment I'm in. I am just going to be super extreme. I'm going to feel everything. I'm going to say everything. And I'm going to be totally me, even if it's not attractive, even if they want me to be this person that's so composed. That's not who I am. Right. And the person I choose at the end, hopefully they will see that and they will still want to be with me, because this is honestly me as a person. That's extremely brave to do, because people in dating, they want to put up a face. They want to be the most digestible, sweet, best version of themselves constantly in dating. And Clayton is like, that's not me. That's not me all the time. Like, this is truly who I am as a person.
Right. You're so right. I mean, and even like, in dating, people this is essentially what everyone is saying, is like, he should have preserved the fantasy that he was only in love with one person, right? That's what everyone wanted him to do.
But it wasn't true.
And it's like, it just wasn't true. And he was like, I'm not going to pretend that I align with this, like, romantic Disney story. I don't align with that. That's not how love is working for me right now. I can only just be really honest about the way love is happening for me. I'm feeling it for 3 people, and that's just how it is. Fast forwarding a little bit to the conversation that Clayton was having with his family. His parents dropped a lot of one-liners that were great, but I think the one that we really wanted to double click into, because this is really important for the decision that Clayton seems like he's ultimately going to make, which is pursuing Susie, right? And his dad says to him, you're too caught up on the one that got away. You're too caught up on the one that got away.
For the attachment styles, I think that Clayton is anxiously attached, because I feel like for him to fixate so much on someone that didn't consent to the relationship, someone that left, it says a lot about like his attachment and his abandonment issues. And I wonder if Gabby had left, if that would have changed how he also saw Gabby and how he received Rachel, because a securely attached person wouldn't be attracted to someone that doesn't want to be with them. So for him to be so caught up into Susie, and for him to kind of like disregard her boundaries a little bit and say like, I know that she doesn't want to talk to me again. I know that we broke up. She was saying all of the stuff. I wasn't listening. I want to redo the conversation. Like, listen, I get after a breakup, you want to have conversations with your ex. You want to talk to them and make sure that you find some closure, but closure doesn't exist. And it's only the meaning that you give it. So for Clayton to then pursue her, it's like, I don't know if I can totally defend that action because she didn't consent to the relationship. Just like Cassie Randolph was saying when Clayton pursued her. Like, she kind of was trusting her intuition of, like, this is the decision I came to. I don't think this relationship is right for me. And then for another conversation to happen when everything is so emotional and you still have feelings for the person and they're hurting too, things are so fresh that you might make a decision that you don't want to make. And I have a personal bias to this because my last relationship, I was, like, when I broke up with him, he had so many conversations with me about, like, getting back together. And the first few conversations, I was like, maybe we should because we keep talking about it. But whenever I got space from him and I was by myself and I was able to breathe, that's when I was like, no, this isn't right for me. Why is he not listening to me? And why is he trying to convince me, knowing that this is what I want, but because he wants the relationship so badly, maybe at the cost of, like, what I want, that it's like the conversation just felt like a moot point. So I just feel like with Susie and even with Gabby itself, because he talked to both of them about, like, kind of having them back in the relationship, it just kind of felt like to me, why aren't you listening to their reservations? Why can't you just be okay with the decision they need to make, especially if Gabby was like, I need to leave because this is something I personally struggle with, which is feeling like love is a commodity. And then Susie being like, I don't know if I can be with someone that said that they actively love two people, which is fact for Clayton. So, like,
right.
And then it just felt very like, okay, then you see Rachel, who has completely won me over this episode too, who loves him so much, who is so emotional, who is reaching out to him, who is trying so actively. And for him to not even, I just don't think that he really appreciated the sturdiness of that type of connection, of someone that is kind of seeing him through all of this emotional ricocheting. She's getting all of this whiplash, and she's like, well, I am still staying here because that's how much I want to be with him. It just made me think, Clayton, how are you looking at these connections? Like, this is a really interesting thing to be aware of. Like, what about Rachel are you not appreciating, and why are you really looking at the people that keep walking away from you? It's like closed doors are closed doors for a reason. I always think that.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up so many good points. I mean, Cassie kind of said this at the end, right? Like, there is something reminiscent about what Clayton seems to be about to do, which is chase after Susie, to what happened with Colton and Cassie on Colton's season of The Bachelor. And I remember when that happened, everyone was like, it's so romantic. He jumped the fence for Cassie because he loves her so much. I was like, that. What? I was like, that's not romantic. Take no for an answer. Take no for an answer. No means no. No. Like, girl said no.
No,
leave her
it's a
alone.
full sentence.
Like, it's a full sentence. No, period. Like, leave that girl alone. Why are you chasing her down? I remember he was saying things like, oh, like, I think she loves me too. She just doesn't realize it yet. It's like, bitch, who are you? Why are you speaking for Cassie? Cassie knows her own feelings.
Can you see inside of her mind?
Can you see inside of her mind? Exactly. I was like, this is not romantic. This is strange. And of course, it panned out that way, right? We know that Cassie dealt with stalking and had to get, like, a restraining order. It was like a whole thing. It was like a whole thing in the end. And so, you know, not that I'm saying that that's what is going to happen with Clayton necessarily, but
I don't think that's Clayton's play, but I do think you're right. Because we've seen this throughout the entire season, right? Clayton does have a problem being decisive. He does have a problem letting go of people. So I just hope that because and I do think partly it's because he's not being particularly introspective. Like, he is a little bit, like, self-serving about this experience so far. There is a little bit of a lack of empathy for what does that mean for Gabby and Rachel, who have decided to stay. They're the ones that have been like, okay, I know that you slept with someone else. I know that you love all of us, and I'm still staying. I'm still meeting your parents. It does feel a little bit like a slap in the face for Clayton to then be like, this is where that enough theory comes in. They don't feel like enough. Like, it's because Clayton has always been thinking about Susie, and then that kind of brings into question, so maybe you did know it was Susie at the end. So why did you convince Gabby to stay? Why did you put Rachel through it again? why are you kind of like proceeding with all of these steps? You need to see it through. For sure, you need to see it through. But like, do you have to continue to put them through the ringer because of your experience of needing to know what's best for you? Like, they also get to opt into the experience too. So like, if Gabby wanted to leave, I think he should have let her leave. And then for Susie, this was not a thing that she could look past. This was a very strong boundary for her, that she wants her partner to be a person that would consider her and not have to like make the ultimatum. So like, all of these things are happening as a lead. Like, for Clayton to pull them all back just to kind of like be in his confusing spiral of rumination just feels hurtful at this point. Like, it just, he's kind of causing harm, so kind of minimize it as much as you can.
I mean, I completely agree that, like, he should be thinking more about how to minimize harm along the way. And to me, it feels like he got to a point of clarity after the girls met his family. It seems to me that that's when he got to a point of clarity that, like, I actually really need to pursue this Susie thing. I mean, people are, of course, gonna say, like, he knew all along it was Susie. Why did he drag Rachel and Gabby in? But I just don't actually think that he's known all along. I mean, Rachel has, like, opened up and blossomed so much this moment of adversity. I definitely fell more in love with Rachel in this from seeing her in this situation. But if he had just closed the door on her earlier, he wouldn't have even gotten to understand this part of Rachel. And so, like, to me, it seems really reasonable for him to continue wanting to see if he, and he kind of said this at one point, I forgot to who, he said, like, I feel like Rachel and Gabby might be, like, really close behind. Like, I know that Susie's the person that I love the most, but I think that I could get there with Rachel and Gabby. Like, he said, I think he said that to, like, his family or something, and, like, that to me seems legit, right? And, like, it seems legit for him to want to see if he can feel that. Now, it seems like in the end, that wasn't what happened, right? In the end, it seems like he got through this next week of family dates and he realized that, no, I'm actually just still thinking about Susie. And so it seems like now he has gotten to a point of much more clarity around that, as opposed to before, where he was still kind of like, I'm swirling, like, can it still be Rachel? Can it still be Gabby? And, like, I need to figure that out. And I just think that, again, like, he could have, like, just let them walk away, but he also didn't force them to stay. He, like, gave Gabby the option. He asked, like, you know, is there any part of you that wants to take a next step? You can, of course, leave, but I still want to take a next step. Like, so at no point was he forcing Gabby to stay or Rachel to stay. And so to me, now is the point where he does need to send Rachel and Gabby home, because now it seems like he's pretty sure that he wants to be with Susie. I think he's kind of gotten to that point of clarity, but I just don't think that he was at that point of clarity prior to this. I think that he was still really trying to figure out if he could get there with Rachel and Gabby, and I think he kind of realized through this whole thing that maybe he can't. It's messy, but it was also honest, and it wasn't like he kept Rachel and Gabby saying, like, don't worry, I'm definitely gonna end up with you. He said to both of them, like, I don't know if we're gonna end up together. I don't know what's gonna happen at the end. I don't know if I'm gonna pick you at the end. So he wasn't, like, leading them on. He was like, I have no idea, and if you're not okay with that, leave, but I don't know. I just know that I still love you and I want to take the next step with you. And so it doesn't seem to me like he was leading them on at all. They know what they're getting into by remaining there.
As you're talking through that point, you're right, and I am coming around to see that perspective just through your explanation, because Gabby did say that after she met his family, that she was really happy that she decided to stay and consent back into the experience. And so did Rachel, and you're right that Clayton has been completely honest the entire time. He has never told them that he's going to choose them, and they're fully aware that he's very confused. So whatever happens at this point on, it hasn't been malicious, and it's to be expected almost. Like, I know one of them will get hurt. I just think it's very intense.
Seems like maybe both of them
of them. I know. It's so intense, and it's messy. It's really,
messy.
really messy. It's
not
messy.
because mistakes.
Like, I don't know how
think
Susie's...
mistakes were made. It's just like a mess.
No,
like,
not because of the mistakes. It's just love. This is relationships, and this is
like
it's so messy. That's kind of like the point of it, and this is another thing why I love hearing your perspective about it, and everyone's perspectives in the comments below, is that there's no right way to have a relationship. It's totally what you decide for yourself. If you're healthy, if you're honest, if you're communicative, you can kind of do whatever you want in your relationships. And Clayton is showing that. He's not the typical mode. He's breaking it. And the girls are following him along for the ride, and they're kind of in unexplored territory.
Oh my God. What I will say is that I was so moved by the two of them and the way that they were just like kind of like when they hugged at the rose ceremony and they were checking in on each other. I was like, my little heart was like gonna explode. I thought that was such a beautiful moment, and then the three of them got together to like just like not cheers, but like kind of like I guess like have a little toast at the end.
It wasn't a cheers ceremony. Moment. They were just like,
I know
we're like, in this ride.
But I was like, how cool that the three of them can just like be together and talk through it and be in the experience together and not feel like it's not like. In that moment, you can tell it's not Gabby and Rachel competing for each other. They can care for each other in this moment. They can care for Clayton. Clayton can care for them. The three of them can be really loving and compassionate toward each other, despite the fact that there is some tension here, despite the fact that there is a lot of really, like, you know, deep pain that's happening. I was so impressed by the three of them. I was like, this is so heartwarming. They were like kind of pushing through their like kind of like monogamy goggles and into this like, okay, like how can we push through that and just like understand like this is just where we are, this is what's happening, and let's love and support each other through what's happening. So to me, I was like, this is kind of nice.
Let's not hate on each other in the comments below. This conversation is really meant to just inspire dialogue. So we haven't seen tonight's episode yet, but we will be back tomorrow with another recap. So tune in then for our unfiltered final thoughts about Clayton and his season. I cannot wait for one. And we'll talk to you guys soon.
Bye.